everybody. Welcome to Project HR, a podcast dedicated to building better workplaces. I'm your host, Beth Pilgreen, and today we'll be talking about the value of the employee voice, and more specifically, about how leaders can encourage employees to speak up and become micro-innovators, problem solvers, and customer advocates for their organizations. If the idea of building a high-performance, high-engagement culture within your workplace sounds exciting, you're going to want to stay tuned because joining us today to talk about all of this and more are Karin and David Dye of management consulting firm Let's Grow Leaders and authors of Courageous Cultures. David and Karin, we are so glad to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Pleasure to be here.
So let's start out by mentioning that this book, Courageous Cultures, is not your first joint effort, is it?
No, our first joint effort was a book called Winning Well, A Manager's Guide to Getting Results Without Losing Your Soul.
I love that title, Without Losing Your Soul. That's brilliant. So what was the inspiration behind this book, Courageous Cultures?
Well, in the work that we had done coming out of Winning Well over the last several years with companies around the world, we heard a common refrain from executives where they would say things to us, expressing frustration about, why am I the only one that's seeing these problems and coming up with solutions? Why are my managers not fixing things as they come across them? Why does somebody have a good solution, a best practice, and the person sitting 5 feet away from them when he could sit in person doesn't know about it and isn't doing it as well? And, then you'd talk to people, go do training work in the front lines of those organizations, frontline employees and supervisors, and you'd hear things like, no one really wants my opinion. They don't really want to hear my idea. They're stuck in their ways. Nothing's going to change. And we would look at each other and say, are you guys working in the same organization?
Right.
And so, employees have ideas and most leaders want to hear them, and somehow there's a disconnect. So, so that's why we partnered with the University of North Colorado on a really extensive research study that was both quantitative and qualitative to get underneath this disconnect and then translate that into very practical tools that people could use to build a culture where safe. It's not safe to be silent. The default is to speak up, and you're deliberately going out and asking for and acting on the ideas of people at every level of the organization.
That's really great because I was in corporate America for years too, and I can relate very much to what you're talking about. Just being intimidated to speak up and not feeling like what I have to say people are going to take seriously. So I'm glad we're talking about this today. Now, when you talk about courage, particularly in the workplace, what kinds of behaviors are we talking about?
Well, there are a couple levels. And so one of the things that we make clear in the book is that we're not talking about the courage to fight through harassment and Me Too and discrimination and those kinds of things. If you're tolerating as a leader, if you're tolerating any of that behavior in your organization, it's a courage sink. You are basically asking people to use all the courage they could possibly muster just to show up and make it through the day. And when you allow that, you're not going to get any of the courage you need for problem solving, thinking creatively, speaking up on behalf of the customer's experience or the employee experience or productivity enhancements. So when we're talking about courage, that's what we're talking about is cultivating a culture where everybody raises their hand, contributes, advocates for the customers, is thinking about how you solve problems, how you make things better and more effective in the workplace.
Why do you think it's so challenging to show this kind of courage at work?
So we found a number of things in our research. So one of the main things was people said, you know what? I lack the confidence to share my ideas. And so 40% said that. And so where does that lack of confidence come from? As we dug underneath that, one of the things is that people are holding on to past negative experiences with speaking up. So, and the psychological safety research of, Dr. Amy Edmondson, who's really a pioneer in that and who wrote the foreword to our book, one of the things that she really talks about is how you are much more likely to hold on to a negative experience than a positive experience. So if you had a bad boss in the past who did shame, blame, or intimidation, or you spoke up and your idea was ignored, or someone stole credit for your idea, you're more likely to remember that than all the times you did speak up and it was positive. So that's one of the things that we really help. Even if you are a fantastic leader and you really want people's ideas, know that it's possible that somebody is holding on to something negative. So you have to put extra effort into showing how much you want ideas. And then another reason that people said they don't speak up is that nothing will ever happen. About half the folks in our research say, nothing ever happens, so why bother?
And that's rooted in human psychology. Along with we had 2/3 of respondents in the research suggest that my boss is stuck in they're stuck in their way of thinking. They're just going to operate under the principle that this is the way we've always done things. And in human psychology, one of the things that happens is that people discount the future benefit of their contributions. And so, you were mentioning earlier about how, you would be hesitant to raise your hand or, gosh, should I speak up?
Yeah.
And what some of that hesitancy comes from is that we underestimate the good that can come from our idea or how well received it might be. And so when we can pair giving people the tools to share well, create a culture that makes it clear that it's actually a positive, beneficial thing to do, and help people understand how to, then they're able to overcome some of those hesitancies and the things that prevent us from speaking up.
Well, and that's certainly my next question was going to be, what are the benefits of having a workplace with a courageous culture? But that alone, that example that you just gave of having somebody to actually have the confidence to speak up, that's a victory in and of itself, that somebody was able to overcome that lack of confidence and that trauma that they had in their past experience, and to walk forward knowing that what they have to say is very valuable.
Absolutely. And that's an individual human triumph, and they get bigger, right?
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that prompted us to write the book was just as we were looking at the way that work is changing, and even pre-pandemic times, there's been a massive shift going on over the last 10, 15 years where anything that can be systematized, routinized, and you can look to the past to say, this is how to do it, this is how to do it efficiently and effectively. Robots are better at those things than people are. And so artificial intelligence is transforming. And what is happening is that in industry after industry, the AI approach, the commodification of your basic processes, and all of that is becoming table stakes for entry. And so if you want to be competitive as an organization, your competitive advantage are your people. It's the creativity they're bringing. It's the empathy, the things that computers can't do that they are bringing to the table that give you that competitive advantage. And so the ability to cultivate and foster all of those ideas from your teams across the organization is a massive competitive advantage. And then on top of that, you've got recruitment and retention and all of the other things that.
Yeah. And another way to think about this right now, is that nobody has the solution of, the book has not been written like how to achieve breakthrough results in the middle of a pandemic, right? Everybody is working to figure this out. And so imagine you have two managers. One says, you know what, I'm going to tell you exactly what to do. As you move to work from home, you're going to do this and this and this, right? Or you have a manager who says, you know what, I don't have all the answers. Let me hear from you. What do you think would work best? How can you be productive without losing your mind during this time and creating a collaborative dialogue? Who's going to come up with the better solutions, right? It's the 12 minds thinking about it or one.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's so confidence boosting too. If a manager actually comes to you and says, what are your ideas? And wants to give you space to say your experiences or whatever ideas you have.
Yeah. And that goes right back to that research where 49% of the respondents said that they're not consistently asked for ideas from their leaders. And, and it's interesting because we'll hear from leaders, particularly with regard to that research finding, who are genuinely open to ideas and want to hear from their people and value those contributions. But their approach is, well, I have an open door. Anybody can bring me anything, anytime. And the problem with that is that the best ideas rarely walk through your open door. As a leader, an open door is a passive approach.
Yeah.
And obviously open door policies are important from a, taking care of harassment and again, getting rid of toxic courage crushers and that kind of thing. But when it comes to innovation and creating that forward moving, solution focused, problem solving culture, it's open doors are too passive. It takes intentionality as a leader to get those ideas.
In the book, you talk about the idea that for some, there is safety in silence. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. And it goes back to the psychology we've been talking about is safe silence is a default. No one gets in trouble for remaining quiet and just going about their day and doing their job. But the problem with that is that organizationally, that's not safe at all. That's a recipe for sliding back, for being, out hustled by your competition, for other people coming up with the micro innovations and enhancements that you could have if you're getting those ideas on the table.
Because when we asked a question in our research and said, so you've told us you're not sharing all your ideas. What are the kinds of ideas you're not sharing? And they said top types of ideas: to improve the customer experience, to improve productivity in a process, or to improve the employee experience.
Those are the three things they're not sharing?
Yeah.
Oh, those are the most important things to share.
Exactly. So that's why really silence isn't safe, right? If you're not getting those ideas, then you are putting yourself at a distinct competitive disadvantage.
Yeah, interesting. All right, Karin and David, we're going to take a sponsorship break right now, but when we return, we'll discuss how to begin building your own courageous culture, so stay with us. Thanks to this week's Project HR sponsor, LaborWise Leadership. LaborWise Leadership provides your frontline leaders with the knowledge they need to help you avoid third-party interference in your business. With this powerful online course, you'll teach your leaders how to create greater engagement while remaining union-free. Get your free trial at projectionsinc.com/LaborWise. We're back with David Dye and Karin Hurt of management consulting firm Let's Grow Leaders and authors of Courageous Cultures. All right, so one of the primary tenets of building a courageous culture is avoiding FOSU, and that's FOSU. Can you tell us what that is?
Sure, FOSU. Well, you've heard of fear of missing out, FOMO, and
yes.
FOSU is our version, fear of speaking up. And so it is
great.
It's that reluctance people feel to contribute, to raise their hand, to suggest solutions and so on, the things that we've been talking about and where that comes from.
I'm writing that down, FOSU. That's really good.
It was interesting. There was just an article that was written today, and I just posted on LinkedIn, but it was about FOSU. Even if you are a solopreneur or, running a small startup, does FOSU still matter? And it absolutely does, right? So FOSU, this fear of speaking up, can surface when you're dealing with suppliers, when you're dealing with customers. It's, part of a courageous culture is how do you manage the boundaries too? Because if you are unwilling to speak up to a customer and share your opinion, you're not serving them as well as you could be, right? Or a supplier. So I thought that was an interesting angle that came out today.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought about that. That's really good. Well, in the introduction, we mentioned micro-innovators, problem solvers, and client advocates. What are these roles and why are they so beneficial to an organization?
Sure. Let's start with the micro-innovator. So we are not primarily talking about blue ocean strategy where you come up with the next iPhone, the kind of these, game-changing, world-making innovations, although courageous cultures can certainly contribute and make those happen. A micro innovation is the day-to-day enhancement. It's the improvement by evolution rather than revolution that happens in teams and organizations. And so you think about a leader that spends a year trying to find a big blue ocean strategy, somewhere to go, versus another leader with a team full of people, every one of whom is contributing a micro innovation every day for 365 days, and the massive amount of growth, improvement, and forward movement in that latter team. And so micro innovations are those, they're improvements in the customer experience, could be a process efficiency, anything that's affecting the business, the employer customer experience in a positive way.
So, for example, that came out in one of our Courageous Cultures workshops the other day. A leader said, "You know what? Instead, every meeting that was an hour when we were in person is now going to move to 45 minutes in our virtual environment." And, that has saved them an enormous amount of time, right? But they have to be more efficient, but it can be more efficient online. And so that's just a really small little thing. But if everyone on your team is coming up with one small little thing, that's what really can add up to much more, productivity and better ideas.
Yeah. Okay, so what about problem solvers and client advocates?
So, problem solvers is where you are moving from someone who is saying, you know what, here is my problem, boss, please fix this for me. And instead of it, they're coming up with specific ideas and they are being taught how to vet their ideas. So, for example, we have our idea model, which we teach people like, to help think through their ideas and present them in a way that can be, more easily heard by their manager. When you can teach people to think through this idea model, you turn into problem solvers versus what we call an idea grenadier. If you've ever had someone who just is lobbing all these ideas at you and then expecting you to do something about it.
Yeah, those are my favorite. Okay, and then finally, what about client advocates?
Yeah, those client and customer advocates. So speaking up on behalf of the customer client, looking out for who it is that you're actually serving. So, and everybody has a customer. If we're doing anything at all, there's a customer involved. So if you're in public service, it's your constituents. If you're in human resources, the customers are usually your internal folks and all of the people that you're supporting. If you're in IT, right, you might not be serving your external customer, but you've got internal customers. And then obviously for so many people, there's the external customer. Who is it that we're serving? What is the value that we are adding to them? And to be continually thinking about their experience and how we can improve that experience and add more value to our customer. And that's an incredibly important question right now when so many people have had their traditional way of adding value to their customers, internal or external, has been upended.
So let me give you our favorite technique that we heard about this. Okay. So I was talking to my sister about our Courageous Cultures research while we were writing the book. And she said, "Karin, I think we do that." I said, "Okay, tell me what you do." And she said, well, so she is a director of rehab for WellSpan Hospital. And so whenever they have a strategic decision to make, one of the things that they always do is have one person in the meeting take on the role of the patient in that meeting. So if Joe is really the director of IT, in that particular meeting, if he's the patient advocate, he is not going to speak about bandwidth or anything, right? He's only allowed to think about that. Later, he can come back and contribute whatever else he's
playing a role.
He's playing a role.
Yeah.
So she said they were implementing a new scheduling system. And the scheduling system was for internal use. So, for example, if my sister's team was going to go in to do some rehab work, they would often find an empty room because the patient was out at testing. And it was, creating some lost productivity for the staff. So they're talking about all the benefits and how they're going to roll this out. And the patient raised his hand and said, "I want to know my schedule too."
Oh.
And she said, everybody in the room went, "Oh." Because, right, you can imagine that's got to be really problematic, right? Because things change and it's a hospital and there's an emergency and a doctor gets tied up in surgery. And he said, "I get it. It's a hospital, but I already feel out of control. I have cancer. Even if we're 80% right, then I can know when my wife should be here. She doesn't have to feel like she needs to be here all the time.
Yeah.
I can know if I need to schedule a call or do something else other than sit here. I know when the best time to do that is."
Wow.
And so she said, because of that, they implemented transparent scheduling for patients. And she said, it's not perfect. They're still working it through some of the kinks, but already has significantly improved their patient experience scores.
I bet. What a great practice.
Yeah, I love it. I love it
Yeah,
so much.
me too. Okay, so let's talk about the book, Courageous Cultures. Now, you've structured this around 7 basic steps that leaders can follow to encourage the development of a courageous culture. Can you share some of those steps with us?
Absolutely. So, this first step is called navigate the narrative. And navigating the narrative is a way to tap into your own story, to reframe what's going on for you, to ground yourself in your own moments of courage. So, a couple of specific ways that we'll do that. One is something we call a courage map exercise, where, and we guide you through this in the book, to take a look at your own career and your 3 or 4 most courageous moments in your career. And what do those reveal to you as you think about what happened and the values that became very clear in those moments? Our courageous moments are frequently things that in the moment didn't feel as courageous as they did something else, maybe angry or upset or frustrated or this can't be. And then we took action and that revealed our values to us. So to think back over those, figure out what those values are, and then ask, how can we add that same value now as a leader with
That's
our
really
team,
good.
right? And it's so fun when we do those courage maps in workshops. So we were just a few weeks ago doing one again virtually with a large organization of and their leaders, and we didn't even get past the first question. It was just, hey, talk about your moments of courage, and people just sharing what those were.
Oh, that's
Everybody
huge.
sat up straight, looked at each other, looked at the camera, and told us, like, man, we can do this. We got this covered. Like, look at all the courage in this room. We're good,
Wow.
And so being able to tap into that, remind ourselves that we have what it takes to face what's ahead, whatever that is. And then another activity that can be helpful as you take and transfer, tapping into the stories of your team, is what we call a fear forage. And a fear forage is something that almost came about by accident. And Karin, why don't you explain that?
Yeah, so we were working with a really senior team. So it was the presidents of all the different brands for this particular company and the people who were in succession planning to take over those roles. So 20 very senior folks. And we were working on a strategic plan for a key initiative for the company. And I got a sense that people were not having the conversation that they really needed to be having. Yeah, you know that feeling like we're not
Yeah.
talking about what we need to be talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I went to my purse and I pulled out a stack of index cards and I gave them to everyone in the room. And I said, on the front, write an H and tell me your biggest hopes for this initiative. And then on the back, write an F and your biggest fears. And then I collected them. Now, I read through anonymously all the hopes. The hopes were all the things, the reasons we were doing this initiative, right? So that, just imagine a conference room with easel sheets spread all over about the why. And yeah, it all matched. So there were no surprises there. What was fascinating was the fears.
Hmm.
I do not trust my peers to do what they say they're going to do.
Whoa.
I think I'm the only one who's going to execute on this. Again and again, all the fears were consistent. So we had
Wow.
to get that invisible information into the room. Now we had to have that conversation. And if we had just continued our planning without having that conversation, that strategy would have failed. So that's all about first step is navigating the narrative.
Then the second step is to create clarity. And this is to be clear, as was mentioned earlier, about not just that you want an idea. I've got to be clear that, yes, I really want your ideas, but it's where do I need a good idea? What does a good idea look like? So as opposed to being generic and just saying, I've got that open door, it's, I really need a good idea right now about how to deliver value to our customer when we can't do it the way that we've always done in the past. Where we most need a great idea right now, a great idea will look like anything that helps improve our employee engagement, employee experience while everybody is either working remotely or having to work, massively intensely during this time. Different organizations are in different situations. And so what does a great idea look like? Being really clear about that. Once you've done that, you move to the third step, which is to cultivate curiosity. And this is where you start drawing out all those ideas. So the patient experience or the patient perspective is a good example of that. Another tool that we invite leaders to use is the courageous question. And this is where you turn that open door passive into a very intentional way of asking. So you've been clear about where you need ideas. Now you're going to ask a courageous question. It's very specific and it's also vulnerable. It's specific about wherever it is you need the idea and what that idea is going to do for you. And it's vulnerable because the question implies improvement is possible, and it makes it safe for people to actually answer the question. So some examples of courageous questions. What's the number one thing that is frustrating our customer right now? It makes it safe for people to tell you. You haven't said, how can we improve in general? You've said, number one thing frustrating our customer. And saying that suggests there is something and makes it safe for them to answer.
Yeah. And that's probably more objective too. So that's, that wouldn't be very vulnerable to share the obvious of what, troubles you're having with customers.
Although, yes, and you would hope that they're obvious, although they're often not. One of
Yeah.
our favorite ones in this regard is we were doing some work and talking with a chief operating officer for a contact center. He said, "Oh, I've got one of those. I like to ask all of my customer-facing employees about once a quarter, what's one of our policies that really sucks?"
Oh, that's what he says, huh?
That's what he says.
Okay.
And and those customer-facing contact center reps love it, because they're hearing about those things all the time. So it's easy for them to say, yeah, well, here's what I'm hearing. And he can, cull through and say, okay, tell me what else are we here? Okay. And which of these 3 or 4 things is the thing that's most frustrating our customers or upsetting our customers? And here's what we can start to do about that.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. So then the fourth step is respond with regard. And one of the main reasons, 50% of the people said, the reason I do not share my ideas because nothing will ever happen. Well, sometimes it's already happening, but you haven't responded, closed the loop. And so responding with regard is a really important step. So no matter whether it's a good idea, whether it's a dumb idea, you still respond. And there's 3 ways to respond. You first always start with gratitude, thanking people for their contribution. No matter what kind of idea. Thank you for thinking strategically about the business. Thank you for raising your voice. Thank you for bringing this up. Then you want to provide information. And the kind of information you provide varies depending on what kind of idea it is. If it's an idea you can use right away, you could say, that is great. Your information is, we're going to implement this, and this is how we're going to do it. Or maybe it's an idea that needs more thinking.
Yeah.
So you could say, oh, the information you could provide is, oh, did you also know that we have this going on and that going on? Now that you know that, what would you think about this idea? Help us think through this. So you help them, add some more information to the conversation. Or maybe it's an idea you tried last year and it really didn't work. You say, you know what? Thank you for thinking about this. We tried this last year. This is the challenge that we ran into. Now that you know that, what else can you help us think about? Or if you absolutely know you're not going to use that idea, you could say, thank you so much for thinking about it. Here's the information. That idea is not strategically aligned with where we're headed right now. But you know where we do need a good idea? And then you redirect them.
Yeah. It reminds me of kind of one of the fundamental rules of improv is you always say yes and.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then finally, the third step of that, responding with regard. So you've gratitude, information, and then an invitation. Now you're going to invite them. Please keep bringing us ideas like this, or where we really need ideas here, and so that you are then,
great.
You can think through that process.
That's great.
So we've got navigating the narrative, beginning with clarity, cultivating curiosity, responding with regard. And then the next piece of this is really what we call practice the principle. And this is something that we discovered in the research, which is sometimes people will say, they'll discover a best practice and they'll immediately say, okay, now everybody do it this way. And that is very frustrating to some employees because the way you did it in New Jersey might not work in rural West Virginia.
We're different people.
Yeah. And so to say, what is the principle in this best practice? Mm-hmm. And then how do you help people to think about how it would work in their context?
That's
and then the next step
Yeah, and then the final two are we're going to galvanize the genius and create an infrastructure for courage. And galvanizing the genius is moving back from the curiosity elements back to clarity and saying, okay, we've figured out this is what we're going to do. Here's the new idea. Here's that micro innovation. Now we need to cascade it through the organization and make sure it's happening. And there are communication techniques. We talk about communicating 5 by 5. That's 5 times 5 different ways for anything that's of vital importance, because people have so much going on. And so how do you communicate as a leader to ensure alignment while also dancing back and forth between clarity and curiosity?
Sure.
And then the building an infrastructure for courage is aligning your systems, your HR, all of your human systems, everything that's in the organization. Human behavior comes from systems first before individual decisions. And so how do you align those to contribute? So like one of our favorite examples there is, let's take onboarding. When the employee is first coming into an organization, you're already communicating a courageous culture or not. Traditional onboarding is a one-way flow of here's what we do, here's how we do it, here's our brand standards, here's where you find the people you need to talk to, here's how the technology works, here's your computer.
Here's the mission statement.
Right? Yeah, all of that. And rarely does anyone ever ask and say, so we would love to know before you get inoculated into our culture, and this is all you know, we would love to talk with you about 3 or 4 of the best ways of doing things that you saw at your previous employer. You know, you've been in this industry. We may or may not use it. It just depends, but I'd love to know what you saw that worked and what might benefit us. And so, you know, starting from day 1 or 2 by actually asking for their ideas or their input or their experience communicates a great deal. And it's like automatic, research on your competitors that's available for you if you take advantage of it. And that window is only open for 6 or 8 weeks, typically, before people get acclimated into their new culture.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate how all of your research and just how you just laid everything out. I feel like everybody who is listening right now is already on your website figuring out how they can work with you in the very near future. David and Karin, we're going to take some time out for another quick break. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to the Project HR podcast. I'm your host, Beth Pilgreen, and our guests today are Karin Hurt and David Dye of management consulting firm Let's Grow Leaders and authors of Courageous Cultures. We are back. What's the role of diversity in a courageous culture?
You know, this is such a timely question, right? One of the things that we are hearing now with all of the racial equity conversations that are so at the forefront in almost every company that we're interfacing with right now, thank goodness, is it is not equally easy for everyone to speak up. We talk about you navigating the narrative. Some narratives are really, really challenging. And so I think it really starts with a sensitivity that it might really be hard for someone to speak up, and the story that is real for them. Mm-hmm. And so, I think it's meeting each person where they are, really actively listening, giving people space to tell their stories without reacting. Without saying, oh, that's this discounting that I think has happened for so many years. Oh, that's ridiculous. You should feel safe here. We don't have diversity issues here, so our culture is safe. So, but if somebody is bringing with them experiences or the stories of their family or their friend, that I think is where this listening culture really needs to start.
And it goes back to the leadership vulnerability, which is if, and just talking frankly as a white male to all my white male colleagues, if you haven't done this listening, it's work and you need to do it. And I'm still doing it. And it's just vital that we're engaged in that conversation and listening, hearing. Yeah. And, and part of the broadening it out to courageous cultures and why diversity is so important is because we want every idea from every team member in every corner of the organization. And the more relevant, value-laden ideas we get, the better off the team and the organization and our customers and everybody's going to be. So why on earth would we limit those?
Yeah, we have a story in the book where we were facilitating a session and, a woman of color spoke up and said, you know what, this might work for somebody like Peter, who was a white male in the session, who was encouraging people, just speak up, you should, but it's harder for someone like me. And we had to just stop and have that entire conversation. So sometimes you have to talk about the conversation underneath the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And to be discerning too, to hear what somebody is not saying, the rest of the story,
Yeah.
Well, guys, I don't want this interview to end without discussing your company, Let's Grow Leaders. So let's talk about that for a little bit.
Okay. Well, thank you. So Let's Grow Leaders, we do a variety of things. Long-term leadership development programs are our favorite, where we work with a group over a period of time. And we are known for our very practical tools and techniques, whether we are doing a long-term program, whether we're on a keynote stage, whether it's the writing in our blog or our book or our podcast, we hear, wow, that was really practical. So that's definitely our brand.
And you can find us at letsgrowleaders.com. And we would love to talk with you about your leadership management development.
Yeah.
needs.
And if you're just wanting to say, I'd like a little bit more about courageous cultures, I'm not sure I'm ready to buy the book yet. So you can download the first couple of chapters at courageousculturesbook.com. And you can also listen to the first couple chapters, the audio version read by us, which was super fun.
Wonderful.
I did as well.
Well, that would be doubly exciting because both of your energies and passion and expertise together, I would only want your voices on the Audible version. Well, for those who are listening, the links to the Let's Grow Leaders website, as well as links to where you can buy Courageous Cultures and David and Karin's first co-authored project, Winning Well, will be included in this episode's companion guide. So be sure to sign up for it today at projectionsinc.com/podcast. Right now, though, Karin and David, it's time for our lightning round questions. And these are the questions we ask every guest of the podcast. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. Topic showdown. In this episode, we've been talking about building a courageous culture in your workplace. In your opinion, which of these initially fearful characters demonstrates the greatest transformation into bravery? The Cowardly Lion from The Wizard of Oz or George McFly from Back to the Future?
Cowardly Lion.
And I'm going George McFly.
What's the best book you've both read recently?
So I am really a big fan of Amy Edmondson's book, The Fearless Organization, and she wrote our foreword to our book, and I just am a huge fan of the deep research she's done around psychological safety.
And since there's two of us, I love that one as well. I'm going to also add Jason Fried, co-founder of Basecamps, It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work.
What's your favorite thing about working as a consultant?
The transformation. When you see that people are leading in a way that is authentic and they are getting the results that they want.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Have the confidence to lead.
Be yourself.
Love it. Who or what inspires you both?
For me, it's nature. I love hiking 14,000-foot mountains in Colorado and the perspective that gives me.
And for me, it's, yes, we're a husband and wife team, and the ability to collaborate and bring different strengths to the business is really, particularly as we've been on this fast pivot and transforming the business in the last 3 months, it's really been interesting and inspiring to see how we can each bring something unique to the table.
Well, now I feel like I need to revise my answer and say,
No, I was
my wife. That's number one.
I was about to comment 14,000 feet, David. That's very good. I love both of your answers. And I just so enjoyed our conversation today. So thanks you guys so much for joining me on this week's episode of Project HR.
Thank you so much for having us.
Been a delight.
It was my pleasure. And thanks also to our listeners. And as always, this is your reminder to grab the companion for this episode at projectionsinc.com/podcast. If you'd like to be on Project HR or know someone who would, feel free to email us at projecthr@projectionsinc.com. As always, we hope you'll subscribe to the podcast and give us a 5-star rating wherever you get your content. Your ratings allow us to be more visible and help more people to find us. So we appreciate your help in growing our audience. That's it for me for now. Let's make it a great day at work.